Greetings, my fellow humanoid dwellers. I create videos on technology and other random things. If you like this video, you might like others. If you don't like this video, you still might like others. Consider subscribing to my channel or checking out my Patreon page. If you already subscribe, hit that bell. In this video, we're going to convert how we collect the data, or the timing that we use to collect the data. We're going to switch it over to something called a CRON job. That's something that's run on the Pi. So that way all of the data collection and storage will take place on the Raspberry Pi, and then the JavaScript or the client side on the computer will just collect the data that's there and display it. For this video, we're going to leave the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript just like it was. We're going to modify the PHP file, but we're going to have two PHP files now. One that the JavaScript will access to read the data, and a separate one that the cron job will access to collect the data. So we're going to take the current temperature or the current PyTemp PHP, and we're going to copy it and make two PHP files out of it. We're going to keep one name the same, pytemp.php, and since JavaScript is already written to collect from that file, that's the one we'll use for the JavaScript. We'll rename the other one crontemp.php. Now currently both these files are identical. We'll start with the one the JavaScript is going to access. We're just going to go ahead and comment out the areas we don't need and then make changes to the ones we need. Since we won't have to access the device anymore, we won't have to open it or read from it or close it, so we can comment out all of these lines. We will still check to see if it exists, because if it doesn't exist for some reason, we don't want to have an error. But when we check to see if it exists, we won't have to worry about altering it anyway. We'll do all the altering in the cron portion of it, so we can get rid of anything that would have to worry about removing data. So we can remove this down here. But we're still going to have to open the file. We're still going to have to read the file, close the file, and explode it back out into an array. Now if we don't see the file for some reason, we're going to want to put out some information that will recognize as an error state. And what I've always found is just to put exaggerated data. We know that the low end is around 21,000. And if we go to something like 45,000, that should make it go off the screen. And instead of running this for loop down here, we'll just put in a bunch of data up here. And that should be enough data to tell us that we're in a state that it couldn't find the temp readings file. And then after we've opened this and created these files, the only thing left will be to send it out. So we can comment out everything else. And that should be good for our JavaScript. The cron portion of this is a little bit different. In the cron portion, we're still going to want to read from the sensor through opening it like a file. We're going to want to read it, close it. We're still going to want to check to see if it exists. But in the file name, in this area, there is a change, because when you're running the cron, it's going to run it from a different location. All of the files that we've been dealing with will be in one directory, but the cron itself is going to run from another directory, so it's not going to know where temp readings is unless we tell it. So we have to go all the way back to the root by putting a /. It's in the var www html and then / the reading. And we're going to have to copy that wherever we see it, which is down here. We're still going to read from the file and close the file. We're still going to explode the temps, and we're going to leave this in. If it doesn't exist, we're still going to want to go ahead and create the file, and it's okay in this case to populate it with 1s and only have 15 because it will catch up in time. And we definitely want it to be different than the jigsaw shape, because that will differentiate an error state between the cron and the JavaScript. Everything down here stays the same, except for we're not going to echo any data. Now we're going to go ahead and upload them. Nothing in this cron will happen until we write the actual text on the Raspberry Pi. So at this point, once we upload this, we will not be collecting any more data, because this won't execute, and the PyTemp one over here doesn't write anything anymore. So it's going to just sit wherever it is. So before we update it, we're going to go take a look and see what the screen looks like. And this is where we left off. I'm going to go ahead and time-lapse this a little bit and get a temperature increase. And now I'm going to switch and I'm going to upload the data. The other thing you'll notice is we're collecting the data every 3 seconds right now. In the CRON, we're going to set it to be every minute. So the data collection is going to slow down quite a bit. Now we're going to go and refresh, and hopefully it just stops right there. Now the data should hold. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my FileZilla, and I'm going to change the name of the tempreadings.txt file and see what's displayed. And I didn't even have to refresh. The JavaScript's still running. It didn't find the file, and we get this. So now we know what it looks like when it's not there, and the CRON job itself will create the file and reapply it. So now I'm going to pull up a document and just briefly go over what a CRON job is and how it's laid out. A CRON job is just one simple line of code, and it starts with 5 asterisks and then the name of the user that's running it, and then the command you want it to run. In our case, we're going to run a PHP script, so we have to put the PHP to let the Raspberry Pi know it's a PHP, and then the location of the script that we want to run. And in the first spot, it's the minutes. The second spot, it's the hours. In the third spot, it's the day of the month. In the fourth spot, it's the month of the year. I said tier, but it's the month of the year. And in the fifth spot, it's the day of the week. Some of the spots are 0 based, which means they go from 0 to 59. Even though it's 60 minutes, it's still 0 to 59. The hours are 0 based, 0 to 23, but the day of the month is not 0 based, it's 1 to 31, and the month of the year is also not 0 based, it's 1 to 12. The day of the week is kind of interesting because it's 0 based and it's also not 0 based, because 0 and 7 are both Sunday. So now we'll go over a couple of examples. An asterisk is sometimes considered a wild card, but it means that it will do every available variable there is. So in this case, it's going to run every minute of every hour of every day of every year of every month forever. So it's just going to run every minute forever. In this example, it's going to run every minute of the hour of 2 a.m. for every day of the month and every month of the year and every day of the week. This example down here, it's going to run it once. It'll run it at the 10-minute mark at 2 a.m. of every day of every month and every day of the week. You can use the comma to separate to pick 2 individual values. So in this example, it's going to run at 6 p.m. on the dot, because that's 0, so right at 6 p.m. It's going to run every day of the month and every month of the year, but it's only going to run on Saturday and Sunday. If you wanted to run it every 10 minutes, or down here every 2 hours, you would use the /. If you did not use the / and you put 10, it would run it at the 10-minute point of every hour. But if you use the /, it knows to run it every 10 minutes or every 2 hours. So it'd run it at 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, that kind of thing, or 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m., all the way through the day. Now we're going to go ahead and SSH into it and set it up in a text file using Nano like we've done before in some past tutorials. We haven't used SSH in a while. I've left everything set up as default. So my username is Pi and my password is Raspberry. The location of this is in the etc directory, but you're currently, whenever you log in, if you remember right, you're set in your home directory. So you do cd ... which takes you back, and then you can type in, once you get to the root, etc, and then it's cron.d. This is the location I've always put it in. There are other ways to do cron, but I've always put it in here. It's worked best for me in this location. Then I use Nano to create the file. You have to use the sudo word in order to be an administrator to create the file. And I'm going to call this cron, and temp for short for temperature. And you don't put a dot, text, or anything. It's just the name of it. And we want this to run every minute of every day forever and ever, so it's 5 asterisks. And then the name of the user you want to run this under, and you want to run this under root, not pi. And then we're using a PHP script, and then you put in the location. And currently we renamed the temp_readings.txt file. So I believe once I save this, it's going to go into effect and start working. I don't believe you have to restart the Pi, but we'll find out. Control O, and then enter to write it, and then Control X to leave. And we'll go back to the browser, and we'll see if the saw blade or the diagonals are gone. It appears it's working, but I'm going to have to let it run a little while, and so I'll time lapse the next section, and we'll see if we get a temperature line. I've let it run for a little while, and it's not reporting data. It looks like it got it once, but then it's not getting it beyond that. So I must have an error in if the file exists in my PHP script. So we're going to go ahead and go back to the code and look at that. We read the data okay. If file oh, here's my problem. If file exists, temp_readings.txt. Well, as far as CRON knows, remember how I said it has to know exactly where it is. It's looking in the etc directory and it's saying no, it doesn't exist. So then it's going down here and it's creating the file over and over and over. And the reason we do get one reading that's good is because it just keeps replacing it over and over. So I believe all I need to do is copy this and paste it right here. Now we'll upload it, and it should just start to work now. We'll give it a minute like this because I don't think I need to refresh it. Since it's using the PHP file and the CRON is just accessing the PHP file, I think it should just start working. If it doesn't work in a minute, you'll see me refresh it. Well, at this point it looks like everything's working. We've been able to collect the data on the Raspberry Pi now. I should be able to refresh this and it should come back just like it looks now. And it does. And over the next 75 minutes it should slowly move across the screen. So in this series of videos, we set up a very basic HTML page. We styled it with a little CSS. We wrote different JavaScript types, one to do all the collection from the JavaScript and store all the data in the JavaScript, one where we did the collection in JavaScript but stored the data in PHP, and the final one where all we did was pulled the data from the PHP and displayed it on the screen. The PHP saw a few different generations too as we went through. The first one where all it did was gather the data and throw it to JavaScript. The second one where it collected and stored the data based upon a command from JavaScript. And the third one collected and stored the data based on a command from a CRON request from the Raspberry Pi. And then we also had to create a second PHP for the last step, so the CRON would actually access this PHP file and the JavaScript would access the older PHP file. At this point we're plotting the data, but there really isn't any numbers out here or any representation on the value that you're seeing. I would make another video to display that if there was any interest, but I will wait for comments from viewers before I do that. I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this series of videos at this point. Thanks for watching.